Hey, welcome to the Sacred Commerce Podcast. It's episode 6, and it's an episode where me and Rowan have our first guest, Dustin Byerley. And I'll take a minute to introduce Dustin. But first, hi Rowan, how are you doing?
Great, thank you, Immanuel. Very excited to have Dustin with us today.
Cool. What do you think of our studio? Pretty dope.
Yep, excellent.
Cool. Yeah, I took a corner of my office and said, "Okay, I'm no longer going to be right in front of the computer with the black thing behind me." So I set us up a nice little intimate reading nook that we could do this from. So sharing a microphone. So we've got a nice thing going on. But Dustin
I wish I
is,
was with you.
yeah, same here. That would be fun. We could do some live ones in the future for sure when you come visit. But anyways, Dustin's a fellow Ojai resident. He's been here since the mid-aughts and kind of didn't grow up out here, but kind of like transitioned to being an adult out here and has had an adult life and done a lot of design work, commercial work, pardon me, uh, kind of what we do in publishing and advertising and that kind of thing. He's a media guy, like me, like you, and except you're a media lady. And and we met probably about 2 or 3 years ago. Last fall, I go to an event down in Ventura, a kind of an underground dance thing, kind of like where you have to get the ticket and then you go and park in a thing and it's private and it goes till like 4 in the morning. And I run into Dustin and we're catching up and I'm like, oh hey, how's it going? And I kind of want to like give Dustin a chance to talk now and tell the story a little bit from his perspective because it ties in and I think you'll relate to kind of like his surprise to have met under these circumstances. So I'll let
Yeah,
Dustin take it from here.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah. We were just at the music event, and I was with a close friend of mine who kind of knew about the work I was doing with Kevin Ryerson material and the film and all that, and um, so she's somewhat familiar with it, just kind of on the peripheral. And so we're just kind of hanging out. We go out back, and I see Emmanuel, and we're like, oh hey, like I haven't seen you in a few years. Or
Yeah.
you're just kind of surprised to see each other and just kind of catching up on life and things like that. And then he said, what are you working on? I said, I'm working on this film. And I started talking about channeling and spiritual stuff. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, who's the channel? And, I said, well, Kevin Ryerson. Nobody knows who Kevin Ryerson is. I mean, not, I mean, my family does, but nobody up here,
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in San Diego. It's in San Diego. And he's like, oh, yeah, no, I know Kevin Ryerson. And I was like, oh, he's mistaken. He
Yeah.
thinks he heard the name, or something like that. And so then as we talked further, oh no, I worked on publishing a book, and I was like, what's he talking about? So it was this really odd spirit led thing. Being up here in Ojai, I felt a little out of my element as far as the community
Mm-hmm.
and the spiritual communities and things like that I grew up in San Diego. So it was this really kind of refreshing thing, and really felt like my time and place was appropriate here,
Mm-hmm.
and so connecting's been a really wonderful
Yeah.
wonderful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just odd, because all of a sudden, yeah, I know who Kevin Ryerson is. I've been working on this book for the last, well, there was a break, but we worked on the book. We released it in 2014. Did some
Yeah.
promotion around it. We went off on our own adventures, and then last year Iman passed away a little over a year ago. You contacted me to get the books from the warehouse. We're like, hey, well, let's do a podcast. I run in, it was just kind of like a
Nice
really interesting
serendipity.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and we talk a lot. There's Dustin did this film called Our Invisible Guests, where it's a very personal film where he goes in and Rowan's watched it, I've watched it, we're getting ready for the interview, and I found it to be this really personal film that explored. It was from the perspective of a child growing up in these communities that were doing these channelings in this, the late 60s, the the 70s, and then into the 80s. And it was such a unique perspective. And it also turns out that he's Kevin's primary archivist and digital archivist. He's in the process of researching the film that he did. It was like a personal, almost diary, but not an expose, but it lets you see just the reality of what it was like growing up, because it's not always easy for kids in really progressive environments, because sometimes the parents are so passionate about this new information, they kind of let it not. Some of them, they could be better parents. Let's put it that way. And I'll say that for myself. I've been so caught up in my own stuff that I'm like, I could have been a better parent there. But sometimes, I think we put it a little bit more up front than maybe some of our parents did. And, that was his experience. And I just found it really interesting that in the course of his work uncovering these pieces about his past and some of the very interesting metaphysical dynamics, the various levels of contact that he and his family had throughout the years, these strange interventions. Intervention is a theme in Our Invisible Guests. And I really kind of regarded this as another one, really another intervention, because you and I are on, Rowan, on our path to support the Sacred Commerce channel, and you've been on it much longer. Iman innovated it. I just immediately resonated with it as something I was attracted to, and then when Dustin and I started talking, I realized that he was also a piece of this, and he's done this really cool film. But his role here is really about his role as an archivist, is being influenced by the work of Kevin Ryerson. He has his own personal relationship with it now, not just something that his parents were doing, and archiving some of this, just hundreds of times. You tell us a little bit about the archives that you're sitting on for Kevin, who is really if he's the intel chip under Sacred Commerce. He's the intel chip under a lot of endeavors out there that are conscious.
And maybe we should just let you also talk about who Kevin Ryerson is, because we're kind of introducing him a little bit in this episode, really, to our audience. I can won't necessarily know.
Yeah, I can give you kind of a broad overview, and hopefully that doesn't take an hour, right?
Yeah, and just know we have brought him up in previous episodes, so there's people do know that there's a lot of influence there from him.
Yeah.
But you're our first guest to kind of go into the weeds with Kevin, so go ahead.
Yeah, it's been a unbelievable journey. Kevin started channeling. He had psychic experiences a lot when he was really young, and I think he was in Ohio or something like that, really young, and ended up in Arizona. And he had a lot of interest in developing psychic ability, and was I think it was kind of called the University of Light Church or something like that in Arizona. And there was a group of people developing their abilities, and in the middle of a kind of a transcendental meditation session, he woke up and everyone was staring at him. And he didn't know what had happened, and apparently during meditation he started channeling, and they studied it at the University of at ASU, and because he was speaking some dialect that was not English, they ended up finding out it was an ancient Aramaic Hebrew or something like that, and ends up becoming the entity known as John today, who opens and closes the channeling sessions. So. And then kind of developed that from there. Well, not too long after, he started kind of doing channelings at these events at Eden Hot Springs in Arizona. In Eden, Arizona, there was this old Victorian mansion, and they had a lot of consciousness gatherings out there. So he was channeling out there, and that's where my mother came across his path, and she had a reading with him, and she grew up Catholic. I mean, she was at church every week, and so here she is. He's talking to her all about her life, and she's like, I've never met you before. How is this guy talking to me about my life? How does he know these things? And then he claims to be John, son of Zebedee, who was a disciple of Jesus. And she's sitting there like crapping her pants, basically, like, is this really happening? And I think in modern times, you hear a story like this, someone watching this who's not familiar with what we're talking about, and it's so easy to dismiss. There's 1,000 channelers out there and all that stuff. But, for me, I'm a very practical person. I'm not a mainstream spiritual person. This is more like, this is banging me over the head. I have to participate, like, how can I deny what I've seen in these experiences? So, but anyway, Kevin basically is a trance channel in the legacy of someone like Edgar Cayce. Similar. Edgar Cayce channeled kind of a superconscious mind, not necessarily like identifiable entities. But Kevin Ryerson actually has specific discarnate entities from other times in history speak through him, and they seem to work as a collective, a creative collective, to come and help.
Yeah, and Rowan, why don't you add too? Because for the viewers, Rowan and Immanuel created Sacred Commerce, this book right here. Run out and get it. And you've had a lot of experience with Kevin yourself. You were married by Kevin in Stonehenge. You have your own
No, we were both married by Kevin Ryerson.
Oh, wild.
That's funny.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I met him really early on in my relationship with Immanuel. And he married us. I think it was maybe the second time I'd met him. Mm-hmm. And they had, Immanuel and Kevin were like brothers. I think Dustin, you probably know this about Kevin. There's not that many people that are as worldly and high consciousness as he is, and Immanuel was one of the few people that kind of met him on a lot of levels. And so whenever they would get together, it was just, they had a hard time at getting a word in edgeways because they both just couldn't stop talking to each other.
I could imagine. Yeah,
it was quite the scene. So there was a real brotherly love there, and so we were married by him in Stonehenge, and then he was like, why don't you guys come on your honeymoon? We have another tour to Egypt. And we were like, well, we didn't have any plans because we weren't really planning on getting married until you suggested it. Literally, Spirit orchestrated the whole thing. And years later, when I, in a channeling years later, like 25 years later, they said to me, we sped up you guys' meeting and getting together and making a commitment because of what you had to achieve in this lifetime together, because of the commitment you'd made. And we didn't want you to take ages, getting to know each other, and it's like, just jump in. And so we got married. We didn't even tell our parents. We didn't even think of telling our parents or any of our friends. It was just something deeply personal between us, and we just did it. And it wasn't until really months after we'd done it that we started to kind of go like, shit, we didn't tell your mom, we didn't tell my dad, we didn't, oh God. And we started flying to see our parents and kind of introduce our new husband-wife situation. So it was quite hilarious. And then on the honeymoon was when we came across the merchant priesthood and sacred commerce, and it just was like bells going off for both of us, because both Immanuel and I had a real passion for commerce as a force of good, as a force of change in our modern world. And to realize that it had been that kind of force in such a incredible culture in the past was just like, wow,
Yeah. I'm curious, Rowan, if you can, even though we've gone into the story in previous episodes, if you could just repeat for Dustin's benefit the discovery of the merchant priesthood, and because it really segues into the Atun Re. I want to talk about some of the other entities that Kevin brings through, but it's really Atun Re is the core source of the merchant priesthood. But I don't think Dustin actually knows how that tour through the temple. Yeah.
So back then, and this was in so it would have been 93. Kevin used to do a tour. I think he did more than one of them through all the sacred sites in Egypt, and he would go in trance in each of the, he'd get to the Holy of Holies in each of the temples, and he'd go in trance, and Antum Re would come through, and Antum Re was an Egyptian priest during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, which was arguably the most successful reign in Egyptian history. And it was the time period, she's the only ever female pharaoh, and she was really only a stand-in pharaoh for her stepson, who was too young. So she was, quote unquote, not meant to be a pharaoh for as long as she was. And in her short reign, she revolutionized the country, and she raised the stature of the merchant priesthood to being an equal with her. So when you see, some of the paintings and some of the temples, you see that the only people that aren't bowing and in servitude are the merchant priests, because she had raised them to a level of equals. And they were basically the people in charge of the peace and prosperity of the nation. And for them to be able to do that was basically, I consider it the equivalent of a very advanced diplomatic training, because that's why they were so highly trained in emotional literacy and emotional intelligence and emotional alchemy, so that they could go into these countries, neighboring countries that were pretty base at that time. They weren't super evolved cultures, so they were just, acting more from greed and jealousy and fear and all of the kind of base emotions. And they would have to be able to go in, change the resonance of the marketplace through absorbing the lower frequencies and in their body chamber, alchemizing them and pouring back out higher resonance, and then they would go in and do their trade. So they were really, they became social alchemists, really, I would say, actually, at the highest level. And so how Ayman and I found out about this was in the Temple of Dendera. There's this beautiful statue of the god Bes. And the god Bes is this little short god with a big belly and his tongue sticking out, laughing, very joyous character, often portrayed with a huge long dick. And he was the god of commerce and the midwives. And all the midwives, when a baby was going to be born, would go to him for his blessing, because at that time their belief was that every soul incarnating should have everything they need ready for them to live an amazing life. It wasn't about coming here to hustle, it was coming here to enjoy. And so he would, watch over the midwives and watch over commerce. And when we heard about this, it was just from some of the temple guards that were taking a picture of us there. And when Kevin came back, we were like, Kevin, tell us more. Who is this? And he started telling us about this, and both of us were just like, wow. And it kind of lit a fire that lasted the whole of our marriage.
Yeah,
it's fascinating. Really fascinating.
He was super, super, super influential in my husband's life, because my husband, until he met Kevin, had basically been a straight up, Arab businessman, and had been given a very short amount of time to live. And he found out about spirituality and life after death and all this kind of stuff. And he was like, God, if this is true, I need to find out more. And he found out about Kevin and got a reading from him. And in the reading, he was like, they say I have 6 months to live, and they say you create your own reality. And like, why have I created this? I thought I'd done everything right. I have 2.5 degrees. I come from a great family, on paper, it was like the perfect life, right? Multimillionaire, like all the stuff. And Kevin was like, oh, well, Anton Ray and John were like, oh, we don't see any problem with your health. We see you mentally, emotionally, and spiritually healed in a 7-year cycle. And you're here to be of change in the business paradigm, the education paradigm, and the creation of the global village theorem. And Iman was just like, paradigm, theorem? What are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
he almost wrote the whole thing off, except he didn't. And all of that was his life's work. Mm-hmm. That's what he worked in.
And the healing component was around emotional expression, owning emotions, expressing them, other things. What was
he
the prescription?
He completely healed himself. The prescription came partly from them, and partly, I think, probably in a little bit more depth from Lazarus. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of stuffed anger from he was brought up to be the perfect boy. Right, and he had his own dreams and visions, and he was required to squash them, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it was just this buildup of anger and resentment that had ended up manifesting as disease.
Interesting.
And so he went in, and I think where Iman is so lucky is he had such an extraordinarily strong intellect. And so if something made sense to him, he just went after him. So his meditations were like the equivalent of a ninja in martial arts. Like he would mm-hmm. get in and do it, and done, mm-hmm. finished. Yeah. No need to repeat it. Like, mm-hmm. and all of us have that capability to get to that point. But it's like takes that kind of mental strengthening, that muscle to like just focus. A lot of us like drift off in our meditations, and it's like, oh, shoot, I was supposed to be forgiving myself, and now I'm thinking about the shopping list, whereas mm-hmm. Iman just had such incredible mental focus. And so he literally went, after being given 6 months to live, he went back and they were like, oh, we must have misdiagnosed you. And he hadn't changed his diet, he hadn't exercised. I mean, he was, on the physical side, he was a nightmare till the day he died on looking after himself. He did it all in the emotional realm.
Yeah, so it wasn't through like nutrition and exercise and a balanced heart rate and a more relaxed lifestyle.
No, he did the opposite. Yeah.
That's funny. So Kevin has this cadre of, well, it comes to John. I think the question that I want to put out there is who all is Kevin working with?
Yeah.
And what does each one specialize? And I think this is a question for both of you to respond to, though I know, Dustin, you've been through several hundreds of hours of content at this point, almost completely digitized. And
a lot.
Just between the two of you, let's hear about these the chorus, the Greek chorus that supports.
And I think I didn't answer the question earlier about the archive, how it came to be. So I can kind of lead into it with that. Is so basically, my dad was in branding and marketing, and with early holistic companies like Eden Foods and things like that early on. So he did even like I think it was kind of the holistic life catalog or something. I forget what it was.
Whole life catalog.
So he was doing like all these ads and stuff. So he was very much, merchant priesthood, kind of vibe of being this kind of conscious marketing person doing ads and he's an Aries, very much a businessman, mm-hmm. And in spiritual music and things like that. So I grew up around the business of spirituality. We'd mm-hmm. get in the car with Dad and he would go do business dealings with all these holistic companies and health food stores and the Taoist sanctuary, martial arts and all sorts of stuff. So so being such a fiery guy, he wanted to market Kevin kind of right away. Kevin's kind of, he's a sensitive guy, he's not the first guy to go push himself on someone, you know what I mean? So from a marketing perspective. So my dad started kind of promoting events and in San Diego, and he'd come up from Arizona to San Diego and they would have these group sessions, 20, 30, 40, sometimes more, people. And then they would have channel on themes, then they would record the tapes, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then my dad started working with a fellow named Leslie Goldman, who started the Essene School of Thought. And between the two of them, they kind of were facilitating most of the events in San Diego and in Arizona sometimes. Mm-hmm. So there's numerous tapes that were recorded between those two people. and as I grew up, when I turned 16, I mean, I knew something weird was going on, but it never really clicked in my head. And when I was 16, I came across a box of tapes that my mother had, and these were tapes that were like the good one, you know what I mean, like the prime stuff, you know. Mm-hmm. And I put one on, and it's John channeling on the Revelation, and this is the first tape I've heard. You know what I mean? Right? So, you know, and I'm just like, what? You know, and, you know, he explains how you can read the story on 7 different dimensions and it all makes sense, right? So one's like the physical world, you know, like, you know, there's the body physical, you know, like it's, there's 7 dimensions to that story. I mean, I was just the whole thing was just blowing my mind, right? And you hear it and you're like, it resonates, and you're like, if this sounds true, like where he's coming from, like there seems to be an integrity to it. Right. When you're around it that piques your attention. Now, does it get weird? I mean, yeah, it gets kind of weird sometimes, and you don't really know what's what and where's this information coming from and all that, you know. But anyway, so long story short, you know, ever since I had heard that when I was 16, it piqued my interest greatly, you know. And so over the years, I had, you know, my dad had tapes, my mom had tapes, and I would listen to them, you know, and always keep it very secret. I didn't talk to anyone about this stuff. It's just too weird, right? You know, which is so wonderful to do this together with you guys. I'm like, it's like a coming out party, right? You know, it's like, I'm normal.
I'm weird too.
It's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Stick it in my aura. I'm ready.
So, you know, it was, I can't always tell you why I do things, but, you know, a number of years ago, I thought, you know, these tapes are from the 70s, and with my parents, I need to archive these. I need to digitize them, you know. So maybe like 2013, 2014, I started recording tapes of my mother's, and then my father gave me a big box of tapes, and I started archiving those. And there's a lot of, you know, group readings, but also family readings, a lot of personal readings, you know. So, and then, so I just started doing that, and I really wanted to just for my family in the future or something, you know, like it just seems important, you know. And
yeah.
And then, you know, what's odd about it is Leslie Goldman, who I'd mentioned earlier, who had kind of co-produced a lot of these early events in the 70s or early 80s with my father. He's based out of San Diego. You know, he came into some health problems and a few years ago passed on. And he has, you know, my dad and Leslie were archivists. I mean, according to John, they were scribes for him, you know. So, you know, these are kind of, we had this conversation last night about scribes, and, you know.
Yeah, I said I feel very much like in my modern role in this world is a modern day scribe. Kind of like they used to just sit there and, you know, and they just do the thing. And I have a scribe. I'm a scribe with an emphasis on marketing.
Yeah, so it, you know, it seems to be there's this cycle of incarnations of people scribing and sharing information and raising consciousness and just disseminating this information, and it just seems like that's what we're being called to do now, you know. And so anyway, so, you know, I think Kevin's my godfather, you know, like we're pretty close, you know. And
wow, so he's the godfather of my son too. So
yeah, and he married both of us. So I mean, it seems like we're all in the same, you know,
Aslan,
same circle, right? But
so you got the tapes. Leslie.
Yeah, eventually, you know, I was contacted by Kevin's wife, Lynn, and she requested that I get the tapes, you know, get all the tapes, Leslie Goldman's tapes, and so I called his partner at the time, and we set up a time to go down there. And I went down there, and I went to his house, and it was the same house from when I was a little kid running around. It was very emotional to kind of see the closure of that. And I think part of that also awakened me to time, you know, and limited time, and the importance of collecting this information and doing something with it, you know. So we went down there, and, you know, there's just tons and tons of tapes and all archived masters, copies, certain themes, and all that stuff, and you know, all the we would go about the themes forever, but you know, a lot of Essene content, you know, the Essenes, you know, John talks about the Essenes a lot, and but as far as the entities, I think early on there was kind of a lot more entities.
Okay.
And then, so there's Tom McPherson, who's an Irish pickpocket, lived in Shakespearean times, I believe. And he seems to be the one that's like maybe still developing his spiritual, like his lack of ego the most, like he's been called out. He's said things about the British or,
right.
Inappropriate things at times. So he kind of he was early on, I know he was on a short leash, so to say, and then early on there was Obadiah, and I think he was a Haitian fellow, very boisterous, loud voice, but that seemed to kind of go away over the years, and other Native Americans and different entities, and there's obviously John, who claims to be John, son of Zebedee, which is one of the 12 apostles of Jesus, which I don't like to talk about usually. I just like to be like, listen to the information. We don't need to get into like, it's he rolled with Jesus, it can alienate people, you know what I mean? And then Antun Ray, of course, and from what I understand, a Nubian priest, I mean, I would say that John, Tom, and Antun are kind of the primaries these days, but early on there was a lot of different entities, and Japu, who was an Oriental gatekeeper early on, and they're all really interesting personalities, but I would say those three primary entities now. I would say Antun Ray has always been kind of like, with my family, been the one to be most present. Like I want to hang out with John, but he's like too cool or something, He's he's like just
John comes and like talks like in riddles and then leaves, and you're like, what did he say? Like Ayman was always like, can you listen to that again and tell me what he said? And I'll listen to it, and I'm like, well,
like, and I think really... for the viewers, I mean, that's like, I think we're familiar with this stuff, to a certain degree, but I think for the viewers, like, John is kind of like this universal consciousness, he sounds very emotionless almost, and dry. And I was always kind of like, why is he so dry? And he talks about clarity of the mind, he talks about, the glassy sea, right? The emotions are super calm. And then, so the moon can reflect on it. You can see the moon perfect in reflection, symbolic of your emotions, right? So as long as the sea is calm, your emotions, your mind is totally still, you can see your emotionality perfectly, right? But when we're agitated, our mind is agitated, our emotions are agitated, it's hard to really see clearly, right? So I would say there's been a couple key points in the information over the years that have been profound, and things like that and especially the clarity of mind, it's almost as if, or he was suggesting that he can tune into people because he has a clear mind. He stated that many times. And so it just really captivated my interest. How do we live in a modern world where we're being bombarded with information and stimulation? And no wonder we're crazy. I mean, that's my view. I mean, we're like insane. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that insanity is literally because we can't see, that we need to take the agitation and lessen it. And there's something magic that happens. Is a little agitation you can't see, a lot of agitation you can't see. But as soon as you get to that still point, you can see. And that's where I believe like the voice comes from. That's where we can start to really move forward instead of kind of stagnating in this agitation, so to say. But John spoke about that, a lot, and that's what he accessed, was that clarity of mind, so, and then, I mean, as far as themes and subject matter, John's like science, biology, super deep, like complex subject matter, multi-dimensions, universe, God, I mean, with a Judaic-Christian kind of background, as a theme, a lot of deep mysticism, And then I think like Antun Ray was, more subject matter that we're talking about, kind of like, I consider him kind of like a jolly inspirer, like he always kind of like a little bit silly, or just trying to make a little fun of things, or lighten the mood and inspire people a little bit, you know, like not get too stuck on the edges of the river, you know, like get back out in the water, get moving, you know, and the power of inspiration, I think, is maybe how I might see Untuned Rain. But anyway, I was just trying to maybe preface the audience with a little bit of, you know, kind of where they're coming from.
And one of the things that's, how much do you know about Kevin's own archive project that he's been involved in? I can't remember who asked him to do it, but where they've been tracking back important consciousnesses that have throughout history and what role they're playing in their current incarnations.
I think what you're referring to is the work of Walter Semke with Kevin and Untuned Rain specifically, in the book The Return of the Revolutionaries. Is that what you're referring?
So it is published now, is it? I haven't checked in with him about it for a while.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I don't know Walter. I have looked over some of the information. It's fascinating. You know, you see, like, here's somebody who lives now, and supposedly they were this person, and you put the pictures together, and they look identical, and then they do it again and again and again, and you're like, okay, this is starting to seem kind of strange, you know, like, you know.
It's fascinating.
So it's fascinating. And you know, Kevin's been the thing with Kevin that I find the most interesting is, you know, I love Edgar Cayce's work. I mean, that really inspired me, you know, and he's very well known, you know, because of he worked, you know, channeled for presidents and movie stars, and he was well documented, and they've got the ARE in Virginia with a vault with thousands of pages of stuff recorded, you know. And the thing about Kevin that fascinates me is his information is as profound, or possibly even more profound, arguably, you know, and the subject matter, when you get to human origins, or you get to, you know, complex subject matter of spirituality and reincarnation and all those things, historically their narratives like overlap each other. It's to me, it's almost like expanded. It's like a continuation or another layer of information that fills in maybe some of the blanks that are missing from some of the Edgar Cayce material, you know. And when you start putting them together and synthesizing them, it starts to get really interesting, you know. But what fascinates me about Kevin is how is somebody that is so profound, so unknown, and is that by design? You know, and is it because?
I would say absolutely yes.
Categorically yes. Yeah. So, you know, it's just been interesting.
When you really get into the, you know, whatever serious kind of echelons of spirituality, if you really believe you create your own reality, then you're going to create the consequences that are right for you. And Kevin definitely is in that camp of 100%, you know, responsibility, and he's, you know, lived a very comfortable life exactly as he want, you know, him and Len exactly as they wanted, really. And you know, with enough notoriety that he can open pretty much any door, but like quite behind the scenes. And in a way, I think Ayman and I have also stayed quite behind the scenes. Ayman was quite behind the scenes in his work. Like, again, enough notoriety that he can open more or less any door, but like not out there, out front. And I think, you know, both of them have touched a lot of leaders, you know, and been of influence to a lot of leaders, and they didn't need to be the front people themselves. That wasn't their role in this lifetime. It
definitely feels something like that, or you know, or you know, who knows what the future holds as far as how this information eventually gets disseminated and how that's accessed. I mean, in channeling in the early 70s, my father's interviewing Kevin when he was young. He said, well, what do you ultimately want to do with this? And he talked about a library that people could access. They don't understand their emotions. They don't understand certain things, that they could go there and get those answers, you know. So,
and a lot of it came out through expressions like sacred commerce, and because there's these, I find it like the concept of channeling, the phenomenon of channeling can attract in the curiosity seeker. They'll be like, wow, what's it? This is very interesting. But once you get past that initial, like, wow, what is this? Where's it coming from? Is it real? So on and so forth. Then it's like actually getting into the content of it, the mechanisms of transformation that are prescribed, the insights around life, and these sort of deep perspectives that allow certainly my mind to be more relaxed about certain things than others, and it kind of gives me a sense of where is it the best place for me to focus for where I am in my life right now. So it's not just a bunch of like interesting information to feed my brain, but not transform my spirit, not transform my behavior. Like there's specifically the practice of emotional alchemy, which I'd love for us to get into a little bit, though I know it did seem like you were saying something when I started saying something, Rowan. So
I was just going to say that Kevin was very involved. Both Kevin and Jack, who channels Lazarus, were very involved in the creation of the emotional literacy series for children, and the dream that emotional literacy would become a household name, which they have all seen in their lifetime.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Impact. You know, they might not be the people on the posters, but it was them that seeded it. You know, Iman, Jack, and Kevin. You know,
that's powerful.
Who seeded that whole movement, and you know, Anton Ray and John gave us a lot of readings about all of that work and how to, you know, create it as something that could be infiltrated into all the existing systems rather than creating a new system, and you know, just like the elegance with which to do it. And I mean, Feel, the nonprofit that we ran for a while, you know, used to publish a newsletter every quarter, and it just put it on the desk of every single psychology department in the country. With nobody had to ask for it; it was just sent to them. You know, like they did these things that were just completely philanthropic and you know, seeding.
That's beautiful.
It's the trim tab thing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by trim tab? Should I take a moment and share that, because it is such an important concept. I want to do it from the book though, because in the foreword, this is a good time to plug the book anyways. So run out and get it.
It's worth
Sacred Commerce. So in the foreword, which I had the deep privilege to write, I finished it up with the inventor and futurist Buckminster Fuller endeavored to determine and document what one individual alone could achieve towards societal and planetary change. He used a simple metaphor to inspire and motivate himself and others. And then this is a quote from an article, an interview. Something hit me very hard once, thinking about what one little man could do. Think of the Queen Mary. The whole ship goes by, and then comes the rudder. And then there's a tiny thing at the end of the rudder called a trim tab. It's a miniature rudder. Just moving the little trim tab builds a low pressure that pulls the rudder around. Takes almost no effort at all. So I said that the little individual can be a trim tab. Society thinks it's going right by you, that it's left you altogether. But if you're doing dynamic things mentally, the fact is that you can just put your foot out like that, and the whole big ship of state is going to turn. So I said, call me Trim Tab. And he actually has that carved onto his gravestone.
Oh, and, I love that. I didn't know that. That's a beautiful.
Yeah, it's very much his thing, and that's really what I think many people in this space do, where it's how can I do things in media or communication in some way that influences an influencer. And then they're out there kind of like really able to relate with the masses. Joseph Campbell was like this too. Yeah. Like there's a lot of people who know who he was, but there's a lot more people who know who he influenced. Like George Lucas, James Cameron, pretty much all of Hollywood doesn't release a film if they haven't checked it against his list of archetypes and a transformational arc that heroes go through in a story to really kind of carry the most pack, you know, for the story listener, you know. So and then those people go out and they make changes, and the same thing with the we talk about in the book, or you guys talk about in the book. I say we a lot because I feel so part of it, but
you have our full permission to say we.
Okay. The Knights Templar. The Knights Templar are a group that they worked a lot behind the scenes. They became pretty forward, but nobody really, like, there's a kind of historic presence, but they don't really know how much they did to, like, seed Europe with the concept of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and flattening that hierarchical structure just by telling stories. Very strategically seeded stories that then laid the framework and the groundwork for the Magna Carta, which led the framework and the groundwork for the Declaration of Independence. And, so there's all sorts of like little secret societies. Some of them are probably up to like no good, just figuring out how our group can get ahead. And then there are people who are operating in secret and behind the scenes who are trying to make the world better. They're doing these little things to kind of up-level the world. And the Templars are one, but then you mentioned somebody earlier, a group that happened earlier that apparently Jesus was a part of, and not many people know of, but it was this community called the Essenes, which were a Jewish sect alive in Judea during the time of Jesus, and some of the channeling material that I've worked with and with someone else, a woman named Mpingo Griffin is the instrument, and she channels the beings of the Christ light. This is a group of people that came specifically to be the embryonic space that the great prophets of Jesus, John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, like these were all people that came out of that community to, as we and other pods throughout the world are doing, to forward uplifting information. And they just happen to be hypercritical, and they were prepared for generations, and this group comes out. So with that preamble, can we talk a little bit about the Essenes? What did you experience of that, and how do you think that plays into everything that we're doing?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, that's a big subject matter. I grew up around the concept of the Essenes a lot, just from the channelings from John. John was, supposedly John's son of Zebedee, brother of James. Jesus is rolling. He sees them on the Dead Sea or whatever, fishing or whatever.
Fishers of men.
And they're like,
I'll make you fishers of men.
So, from what I understand, my family's had a lot of readings on it. Supposedly my dad was a scribe with him in those times, and I don't know. I mean, that stuff is really not that important to me. But
well, and Iman and Rowan spent a lot of time with Gabrielle Cousins in Arizona, who is creating an Essene dynamic in the modern era too. So basically, I mean, it seems like a kind of an outsider Jewish sect that kind of went out of kind of mainstream. And very mystical.
They had like bathing pools. They'd wake up first thing in the morning as the sun rose. They would stand in water and meditate, and were very kind of strict. I mean, if you read any of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it seems very kind of strict. And but there's tons of information in the tapes about them, and they seem to be. I mean, I can talk about the stuff that maybe some people know about, but there's kind of more interesting stuff, about natural technologies, and they get really into how they took seawater and then, placements of rocks and gravel to, and these processes of filtering out and turning salt water into fresh water and using that for plants, and using copper with plants to stimulate growth. And I mean, there's all sorts of really fascinating natural technologies that I think could benefit the world right now. But yeah,
are those things that came through Kevin, or that you?
Those are all channeled. John channeled. Specifically. Those are on some of the tapes. So there's a lot of interesting stuff like that. It seems like that they were. I mean, from my studies, I'm really interested in human origins on a personal level. And then trying to understand who these entities were and how they relate to each other. So like someone like Antun Ray, he claimed to be a visor, of Akhenaten at one point, and I called him out. I said, I've done the research. I know the visors recorded. You're not on there. And he confided in me his name in that particular lifetime. Antun Ray's his spiritual name.
Yeah.
So he claimed that he was the Visor Ramos during that time period. And sure enough, you can find him. You can look at his tomb. You can read all about him. It's super fascinating. But I had to kind of, that's the other thing with spirit is I don't think that they want to create karma or avoid creating karma indirectly. So you kind of have to ask. Mm-hmm. Like if you're good. So I asked him very specific questions about my theories about who he is, where he comes from, the material that Akhenaten shared, that time period of Egypt and the spirituality and the monotheism, the origin of monotheism. Well, Christianity is a monotheistic religion. It was in Egypt during the whole Aten thing. And I'm like, wait, is there a correlation here? So I started inquiring. I said, how did Moses have any connection with some of this information? And it's really fascinating, some of the answers he gave me. And, basically from what I could tell is that there was a lineage of spiritual information. You might say Sons of the Law of One from like the Edgar Cayce material, but a lineage of spiritual awareness that comes from Lemuria, Atlantis, and then 10,000 BC or whatever it was, 10,500 BC, I think Edgar Cayce talks about them coming out of Atlantis and into Egypt. And this kind of knowledge being held and passed down. So the Essene, I believe it means like the remnant or something of the sort. Mm. So it's kind of like these groups who have kept this awareness or these teachings, and I can't help but believe that over time that a lot of this is through some sort of channeling mechanism or incarnation of channels that keep this lineage going. Mm-hmm. It's like a family, a family of light, you could say, right? And believe me, I am the last person. You're not going to see me with a sacred geometry shirt on or any of this stuff. I mean, this stuff's banging me over the head. I'm not that guy, you know what I mean? But I can't ignore what I've seen, and so it appears
he got dropped on his crown chakra when he was a baby.
So basically, the Essenes, to answer your question, to me it's a remnant. It's a yet one more legacy time period in time and space where this information is being taken care of and passed on to the next generation.
And in that case,
also,
go ahead.
The Essenes, I mean, there's all these different time periods, and we mastered different things in different time periods. And the Essenes, they got really good at the whole body piece. That's why Kevin and Gabrielle Cousins have worked so deeply on like all the things that they talk about in terms of how to care for the body. And I think in waking up more in this lifetime, when we're able to check in with those past lives and remember those things properly, it awakens that literally on a cellular level for us. That health that we reached in those lifetimes, we can kick that back in. And ultimately, everything's so much more pliable than we would ever imagine, because it is an illusion. And so I think, one of the things that Lazarus has always said to us is that, in the lifetime that you do make it home, that you in your last lifetime, that lifetime is taking all your lifetimes home. And so it stands to reason that in that lifetime, you would become aware of all your other major, enlightening incarnations, because those things almost need to reawaken in you for that to happen. So it's like all your lifetimes are rooting for you to make it, to get super conscious, because it's also a completion for them, and I really saw that in some of the interactions that Iman and I went through, because we were very lucky between Kevin and Lazarus. We were told a lot about our our destiny on this lifetime and our past lifetime influences.
Mm-hmm.
And there was things that were scars from past lives that we totally healed in this lifetime. And we didn't necessarily understand what we were doing kind of during them, but like then, often from other channelings, they would, kind of explain what happened, and it's like, oh, whoa, that was actually just finishing completely from that scar. I mean, maybe I should give an example. I mean, the best example probably is so Lazarus gave us 3 lifetimes that had major influence on this lifetime that we would need to be careful of, in choosing to be married again in this lifetime. And the first one was kind of a bliss lifetime, 5 kids, lived in the country, all Celtic lushness. And we're like, great, let's do that again. How about, I'll be dad. And he was this German landowner, like boss, 8 on the Enneagram, like tough cookie. And I was his baby girl, his China doll, his, sweetness, all the sweetness. And he adored me. And of course I reached 16 and I fell in love with the farm boy, which to him as the Lord was blasphemous. And he forbid me from seeing him. And so I ran away with him in that lifetime, and we never saw each other again. And it was heartbreaking for both of us because we had such a closeness that was basically, if you want to, peel back the onion further, was ruined because of chauvinism, because of his chauvinistic opinion of what his daughter of such preciousness was allowed or not allowed to do. So that person was Cody in this lifetime, who I re-met in this lifetime and told my husband that I had to leave. And I left for 2 years and spent 2 years with Cody, and made the space for me to do that in this lifetime, and did not, throw me out and never talk to me again, and all the things that had happened in that lifetime. And as a result, eventually I came back to my marriage because we obviously had a lot to finish, but I had that healing with Cody and that healing with Iman, but we didn't understand the full mechanics of it until Anton-Ray was like, you need to honor her love for that man, because of, and then explained who he was, and that was the lesson, was him being able to honor my love for somebody else and not make it about him, not make it about him. And he was big enough in this lifetime to do that, which is, you're both guys, that takes it takes a big person to do that.
Karmic cycle.
I'm not particularly, I have my challenges around loving somebody and wanting to still connect with them, but I really feel like I've really gotten a handle on what it's like to just honor love no matter what. Like, love is important. Like prioritize love. Don't And if you're making it about some sort of selfish thing, then that's not love. And so that's something that I've really been able to work with a lot in this lifetime, is kind of really, whether I'm with someone or not, if there's love there, I never lose that love. And I also consequently, I can be jealous if there's someone I love that I don't get to connect with, but I don't usually get jealous if they love somebody and it's a real love. And it's we need more love. We need to tear down the barriers to people experiencing love with each other. It's just really, and that's in jealousy and that kind of is this mine? It is mine. I'm going to make it mine. And that's just such a really challenging thing to get over from the male pride and chauvinism dynamic, but also from the woman's side, where it's slightly different. One is an issue of control, and another feels like an issue of existential safety. If I don't have this protector, if I don't have this person taking care of me, then what'll happen to me? Maybe I'll die, maybe my children will die. And then that's sort of an existential piece. But then underneath it, it's really about core worthiness. Like, am I loved? Am I worthy of love? And that's where people in our modern day can really kind of be hit the hardest, is if you can love me and you can love somebody else, can the love you have for me actually be real? Or are you just only able to go so deep? Well, what if you're able to go deep, and you can go deep with a lot of people? In an ideal world, to me, that's a community. That's a family.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you're having sex with everybody that you are deeply in love with, because that can be a real confusing agent. But it doesn't mean that like you just go restricting all those things. Like it has to be from the heart. If we're not making decisions from the level of the heart, we're losing our way as a culture.
Yeah. And I think it also really strips back to the true gifts of love versus, our culture has made it so much about, sex and intimacy and that side of it, which is a beautiful, obviously, side of love, but
right.
Love is so much more, and creates safety and knowing and trust and all these kind of eternal qualities. And that was what was so beautiful about Imma and I's relationship, is because the love was so ancient and so deep, we were able to go through a lot of the kind of chauvinism barriers together, and the love was never taken away. So that safety was solid. It was never like, oh well, I don't love you anymore. That was just never an option at any turn, Right. And he taught me everything I know about love in so many ways. Real love.
Yeah. Well, and you, in the tools that you received from the Kevin Ryerson channeled material, like it's great to have these concepts, but if you don't have if you're not training emotional literacy and emotional awareness, you can't possibly process through the complexity of emotions that you're dealing with when you're dealing with fear, anger, and jealousy. And that's what is such a phenomenal gift of what you brought forward from the Kevin material through Sacred Commerce, was this like a real system. It's not just good ideas and advice that's kind of ad hoc. It's like, no, here's a system. Here's how we operate emotionally through the world. Here's how you can regulate that process. Like this is a curriculum for transformation, not just philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think what so many people, I want to say, miss on the spiritual path is, there is so much of this kind of like quick hit spirituality where people have like a mystical experience, which is a beautiful experience, and I have hundreds of them because they're incredible. But then expect to be enlightened the other side of it,
right? And
enlightenment is actually it's a set of stairs. Like you just keep on, like it's a never-ending staircase, right? I mean, you're never there. There's that God's not done. Like he's not sitting there like, I'm done. When are you guys all going to meet me here? Like, no, they're still growing. Like so that's where we were like, okay, we need tools. We need to share tools, because that's what is going to give you a stabilizing factor, so you can have those spiritual experiences be more and more of your life, but you can also have the hard things of life. I mean, people are always going to die, leave, all of these things, that's just part of life, right?
Yeah.
And you can move through them relatively quickly because you're able to process yourself through these things. They don't have to devastate you.
Yeah.
Imma and I would do things that people would, were grounds for divorce. Like, plenty of people have gotten divorced for less, and we'd be done with it by the end of the day because we'd understood where it came from. We'd processed each other, we'd just gone there. Nothing was left under the table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, it feels like an underlying aspect of that is there's a dynamic around marriage that is more than just the next level of boyfriend girlfriend, and it feels like in a lot of common applications of the marriage technology, it's just the next level of boyfriend girlfriend. And you were looking at it from the perspective of this marriage is a new being, and it's part me and it's part Iman, and we've got to like, and again, this is not, if you're in a bad marriage, get out, but make some real, like, do some due diligence as to what makes it bad. And if it just means that you're getting triggered a lot, it might be something to look at before you do the divorce card. And it just seems like you all did a lot of that. Let's look at myself here. And you really kind of took out marriage is about romance. It's not about romance. And I know that romance and these kind of love threads can really hold it together. But marriage is really like making a small community that then has to fit into a larger community. And if you don't really understand that, and then the first time, the notion of romance goes out the window, you just feel so hurt. You could never believe your person would say something like that. Like you're in a childish relationship. You're in a childlike relationship. Maybe a teen child, maybe not but there's like a next level. And to me, I've experienced that in terms of when a relationship ends, do I still want to be in a relationship with that person? And to me, that's where the love really shines forward. And I experienced that love certainly with my son's mother, Alara. I recently ended a relationship in August that, while I can still have like a real tendency to want to hold on to the romance piece of things because it kind of had that polarity, that kind of extreme masculine feminine polarity built into it. It kind of almost called for that level of like high energy. It's pretty easy for me to click back into, yeah, but do I still want this person in my life no matter what? And it's a yes. Like, is this person my family? And if we're not getting to those points every time on the end of another relationship, I think we should work really hard to try to make that happen. Just for not even if there aren't children involved that are going to be impacted by that relationship. Like if we don't work out these points of like how to manage conflict between individuals at the village level, then we really don't have a prayer of a chance as a global civilization.
Yeah, it's funny when you said that. I had gone a number of years ago. I'd gone through kind of a pretty intense emotional situation with a breakup, and I had a reading with Kevin during that time. It was Antun Ray, and he really addressed that with me, and it was, he kind of was, really firm with me about, breakups don't have to be, a terrible thing. And really explained to me how it's a natural part of life that we have endings and beginnings, and how do we kind of honor that, instead of making it, this personal attack, you did something to me, or something's wrong, or you're bad, and all that. And he also talked about the power of inviting people over for a meal. Like, if you have conflict with people, invite them over for a meal, with a group of people. It's that there's something about the peer, of your community, your family, and other people around that sets you straight with other people really quick, So it was kind of like I was having some personal issues, going through all this emotional stuff, and it was like, invite them over for a dinner. Invite everyone. I was imagine like 10 people, maybe 2 or 3 you don't get along with, or you're having some problems with. That stuff will be clarified. It's when we don't see each other face to face. It's when we're talking about each other behind our backs that it creates this illusion that is completely unnecessary. So anyway, I just wanted to share it in regard to relationship. And ever since then, I have had a couple breakups, and I'm always like, thank you so much. I love you. Like, and it's like but it's not always the case on the other side. I have come across the very traditional view of, well, you've wronged me, and all that kind of stuff. and breakups have to be negative.
Right.
So I love what you're saying about that, and to hear about your relationship, and that focus. It's there's endings and beginnings. How can we transition these in ways that are honoring and respecting and loving and appreciating what we've been through together?
Yeah.
And I think that is, what you said about, calling Kevin for a reading, that is somewhere that spirit can be so helpful. I mean, I know that when Iman and I separated for that 2 years, he very quickly had a reading from Kevin, and he was like, I thought we were like together forever, and like, why is she gone? And Autumn Ray was just like, oh, you need to honor her love for this man. And he didn't tell us that was the guy from the other life at that point. He just said, you need to honor her love for this person. And it was all done very upfront. I didn't betray him like I told him before. And he said, both of you need to grow up in certain ways that you need to be apart for. And we see you back together having a child. And Iman was like, what? Like,
what are you talking about?
It's not happening. She's moved out, And, but they kind of can give you this perspective that gives you space for you to be able to move through the intensity of the emotions without getting consumed by them. It gives you just like that kind of little bit of like breath to be able to, because of course what is real, what's always real, is the intensity of the emotion. And that's what does need to be felt in every case, and it, is why half of these things happen, is just to trigger us to feel those things because we've left them under the table or whatever it is, and to be able to not shut down in the face of them.
And to get that space from what popular culture thinks you should do in this moment. Because, there's for one podcast like this that's saying, hey, have an expansive attitude, you've got like 100 podcasts that are saying, what? Bruh, she went outside the relationship? Oh, that's sus. You got to end it, bruh. And it's like, you got to be the man here, and there's like these kind of like, you've got like this high levels of chauvinism that's kind of creating rules around love. And it's pretty classic, and you can see a massive rebellion that's happening where that's just being rejected, but not necessarily with a really strong counter argument like we're trying to articulate here. It's just kind of like it looks like ghosting. It looks like just unaccountable behavior. If someone decides, this is over for me, one, maybe because they don't have the qualities to be upfront and honest, but let's be honest. Let's say you start speaking these kinds of truths to your partner. They're not going to sit there. Most partners aren't going to sit there in a kind of like a loving, regulated space, seeing what comes up, processing their triggers. They're going to go into attack mode. They're going to start putting the other person down, and these things just kind of downward spiral out of control. And what could have been handled here ends up down here. Those people will definitely not see each other for another few lifetimes. Whereas in this case, you guys were able to like stay here. You were able to process through what you needed to complete what needed to happen between you and Cody, so that you could go back into this, into what was the contract for this lifetime with Iman and Aslan and all of us that you ended up being with.
Exactly.
Yeah. Powerful.
And I think, probably the most major defining factor of which direction that takes is whether, as an individual, you hold that belief that you create your own reality.
Yes.
Because I think when you hold that belief, then when the shit hits the fan and the person cheats on you or whatever happens, right? Then you're exactly. You're not looking at it as like, they did that to me. You're looking at, okay, why did I allow that? And, every time you have reasons, whether it was that you needed to let go of that relationship and you were never going to, And so they had to come along and just do something that was going to blow you out of there, right? Mm-hmm. Like whether, I mean, whatever, the reasons are going to be as varied as, each of us are varied.
Right.
And the thing that always kept me in the relationship, because Iman, he was an amazing, amazing being, and sometimes an awkward human, like we all have our awkwardness as our human entity part.
Yeah.
And there was
counted
two things I think that really kind of always like made me stay, if you like, that made the commitment strong for me. One was I chose my barometers. Like, okay, what barometer am I going to watch? Am I going to watch the romance barometer? Fucked. Leave today.
Right.
Done. Like that barometer doesn't go. Okay. So what barometers are there that mean something to me that I'm going to be watching as to whether I stay in this situation?
Yeah.
And to me, in this lifetime, it was always, am I growing? And I grew every single day of my life with that man, because his consciousness was so extraordinary. And so even those much harder things that do take lifetimes to deal with, like chauvinism, where it would look like I was getting nowhere and we were going to keep on banging up against it, and it was going to keep on being, a chauvinist situation because of both of our projections on what the word wife and or husband and or marriage mean,
Right.
And it was like, okay, it's not how I want it yet, but I'm growing and it's moving, and it kept on moving. And as I've said to you before, there were some things that got resolved in the 27th and the 28th and the 29th year, but I feel so complete with that person because we kept on growing together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This conversation is making me miss Iman so much.
Oh, what a man.
Yeah. I wish you could have met him. He's pretty amazing. Beautiful being.
He was an exceptional being.
Yeah.
He was.
You're here.
Yeah.
I feel you. What else do we want to talk about?
Here every time we open these mics.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be curious in how much you've heard of like emotional alchemy and stuff in his readings, and how much that has come out to other people, or how much that was something that he really brought out with us. That would be something I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, that's a good curious question.
I mean, I'm getting the sense from talking to you that Kevin is kind of a Johnny Appleseed of consciousness, and he pinpoints certain people and disseminates certain information in particular ways with that person.
Neat.
So, I'm hearing terminology you're using, and I know what you're talking about, but it's like it's all slightly little different, I think, for he knows what he's doing. And there's a bigger story behind this, I think, I mean, I would say, when I talk to Immanuel about the future, and I've offered to basically like 3 options to Kevin and Lynn with the material, it's everything from just archiving and sending it to them to kind of doing a media thing to, I don't know what the future holds, but, if we did do a book, one of the ones I said was, about the roots of emotions. It's so powerful and so fundamental when you have I mean, I hate to say it, with a correct view of understanding the roots of emotions, and where they come from, how we use them and how we respond to them. That's like gang level, like intensity. I mean, it's like, it's really important gangster level,
And for the viewer, the root levels is kind of like, I associate them with the chakras, but first chakra is fear. Second chakra is anger, and the third chakra is jealousy. And they kind of, in very constricted energetics, and then you have this universal thing of love, a universal kind of core emotion of love. And is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, very much. So, throughout the information, it gets very interesting. But I think if you took it together, like the stuff, Rowan, that you're familiar with, what you guys talked about in the book, I think some of that comes from like in Kevin's book Spirit Communication, he talks about the 8 human needs, and he gets into emotionality, and he kind of cherry picks everything from Buddhism to Judeo-Christian ideas, but he's got a synthesis of 8 human needs that involves emotionality and things like that. So it sounds like it's like the same information being applied in slightly different terminologies based on the situation, But so he gets into the destructive emotions, and he talks about the divine mind, so the terminology, and these are things that stick with me when I hear the material, and he says that the divine mind is the balance of passion and compassion with anger and fear. And that sounds odd. You're like, well, what does anger and fear have to do with this, right? People are trying to eradicate destructive emotions, and what he says is I think much different than what people might expect, that it's important to look at fear as concern. If you're in fear, it's kind of like concern gone wild, right? It's like it's an unconstructive concern, right? Yeah. But if you acknowledge and honor this biological process of our consciousness in this monkey body having this sensory experience, of course we're going to be responsive to our environment, right? So we're going to have concerns for our physical well-being or our needs being met from a biological perspective, So, exactly. It's important to look at, maybe in my view, or what I would love to, share or express is, to stop looking at quote unquote destructive emotions as something that are bad or we have to eradicate, and pursue a deeper understanding of the mechanism of what it is, fear, So, looking at fear as concern, and really shifting our point of view and our terminology so we can start to respond and honor, what our body's saying to us and what the situation's saying to us. Now, it's not that simple. I mean, you can have fear and, concern for something, and it can be something that it's a real concern. You are going to die if you do not respond to this in the proper way, And then there's concerns that come from ego, right? So to be able to sort those out really quickly and say, okay, this is my ego talking, step back, listen, observe the situation. And then, we talk about, like the anger. Term anger, and he talks about that's a sense of violation. So it's the same thing. It's like, let's change this terminology. And again, anger is violation gone wild, right? It's an unconstructive, thing. So, but, okay, so what is this sense of violation do I feel? And immediately apply the same principle. Is it ego that I'm responding to this? Or is this I was truly violated, I need to address this? And how do we address it at that point? So if you're spiritual, you have a spiritual view, and you apply grace in your life, and you understand that people are ignorant and all that, then you can approach a sense of violation with their best interest in mind, not necessarily even yours, but that would be a part of the equation, right? So this is some high level shit. You know what I mean? We're not talking about so I got violated, so I'm going to go sue him, and it's fair now. This is, I understand you're ignorant. I'm applying grace to the situation because it's my dharma and my karma. It's my dharma and my karma to do so. Now we're getting somewhere. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden we've gone from
that extra piece of like why you why you allowed that violation at this moment in your journey as well, I think is so relevant because as my friend Lazarus always says, there is going to be violence in the world as long as there is violence in you. As long as you can see violence out there, then you have it in there, And so there's a lot of the quote unquote harder things that have happened to me in my life that their meaning and significance has changed over time. So what was a violation at age 9 when someone touched me inappropriately, like now I can see how I created that at that moment in my history in this lifetime, because sexuality was something that I'd misused in the past, and B, was a superpower. And I needed to put that on a side and develop emotional maturity before I even thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like there's always going to be your own very, very personal reasons for the way that your reality interacted with that other reality that you don't
Mm-hmm.
always understand straight away.
Yeah.
You know, that perspective grew in me over many years of like what, I basically put like a pause on a bunch of my power at age 9 because I wanted to develop other powers first. You know, like in my overview picture.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But like when we just make it about somebody else, like and whenever, anytime we're a victim, like we're basically handing our power away, and that's just never okay with me. So I'm always like, okay, give me that back. Why did that happen in my reality? Forget you. You know.
Yeah. It's hard to know how we come to what places we're at. You know, there's been so many times I'm like, I am lost, I'm completely off, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I'm not. You know, I mean, who knows? How does this stuff evolve? I have no idea. You know, but you know, the emotional side of things, I think it's such a fundamental thing. And then if you can apply, you know, the understanding of the emotions. You talked about pity. You know, it's like when you can help but you don't.
Yeah.
Like. Like, that's hardcore.
That's interesting.
That's hardcore.
Yeah, I love these definitions. Like Gaiman used to drop another. I'm sure his extended envy is jealousy to goes the next level where you don't want them to have good things. You're not just jealous that you don't have the thing that they have, but you don't want them to have it either.
And you want them to fail.
And you want them to fail. Yeah. It's so pity is when you can help but you don't. I
think ultimately, you know, we start to recognize that there's a lot of work to do. You know, and that, you know, this idea that we somehow deserve something and we're going to hurt each other till we get it is a really important thing to overcome.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's tricky because you can start in on this path and you can get these tools and you can start working on it and getting kind of like up your own accountability level, your own competency around this. But then when you go out and you try to engage with the world, you're still going to hit a lot of like people who haven't done that. So that can be a challenge to like, it's kind of interesting thing. Like you might get so far in terms of like managing your emotional dynamics, but in doing so, you're opening up an opportunity to be triggered by other people who haven't been doing that same level of work. So it's a kind of, be aware of that. You're just because you're starting to do it doesn't mean that the universe is just going to start throwing all these people that are doing the same thing in your path. You've got to keep doing it. You've got to keep showing up.
That's when it's your time to do your work, right? You
haven't done enough yet.
I mean,
it's a trick.
Almost the hardest thing about it is the more aware we get, the harder the lessons get because we're ready to handle them. You know, and when we think about having had 5 and 10,000 lives, like, which is the case for a lot of us.
Slow
learners. That's a lot of trauma that we've been through. That's a lot of losing our sons and daughters and parents and wives and husbands. Like all of that stuff that is traumatizing in life, of being murdered, of being raped, of raping, of being a murderer. Like there was this one meditation that I went on with Iman. It was just to music, but I was like, okay, I really want to get inside the head of the rapist and the murderer, like because I just don't have I don't have that in me, but like I must have that in me because it exists. Like so I just want to go there, like, and it was the first time I had ever had compassion for them and realized that they're so far from their sense of their soul essence that it would feel good to steal someone else's life or to steal someone else's sexuality, to feel a little bit good about themselves. That they're so far, and that in other lifetimes I've probably played every role. Like I'm sure I missed a few, maybe I haven't been a mass murderer, maybe I haven't been a like, but most likely I've done all of them. And so if I'm gonna forgive like myself for those things in all of those lifetimes, then why would I hold anyone on the line to that? Like the level of forgiveness that we need to go to when we get into the higher levels of consciousness is absolute. Like there's no room to not forgive anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, grace is a really powerful thing. I think that John talked about a lot.
Such a powerful thing.
And detachment in that context makes it possible to hit those levels authentically and still play a role in society and still like like you may be able to detach, like you may still be on a jury, in a murder trial, have these high levels of awareness, but still think, as part of this social order, I'm going to vote with the rest of the jurors and say this person should probably be locked away.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's this weird like paradox of like total detachment and total attachment, because I think when you can't get to those places where you can feel how good it would be to like, like the example I always give that shocks people is like, I kind of get it how people like want to go in and Uzi a shopping mall. It's like it's just all this energy and it's just like they just want to destroy something, and it's like it's that release of like all that anger that's built up but it took me years till I could understand that, till I could reach that level of anger in myself where I was like, yeah, I get that. I get how they get there. I get, like, I can feel that, I can feel that level of anger in me. Like, I would never do that because I have a spiritual context that I live in. But if I didn't have that, that could just feel good. You know what I mean? To let it all out.
I'm sure there are millions of Call of Duty video game players that agree with you there. They just one of those first-person shooter video games where you just go and all you do is mayhem. You just mayhem.
Just let it all out. Just blow them to pieces. And I think that's a really important piece on our individual emotional journeys, is to get in touch with our own levels of these things, because again, they're not going to exist outside of us unless they exist inside of us. We're not going to see them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's I think where so much spiritual bypassing happens, and it's like people try to go straight for forgiveness and straight for detachment, and you can't. And those shouts will get more and more extreme and come from more and more directions, because that's the next thing on the list to look at. Not because you're bad and wrong, and that's where I think we can get so harsh on ourselves. It's like, oh my God, I thought I was spiritual and now I'm bankrupt. It's like, no, now you're dealing with like levels of loss you haven't dealt with before. Not that we should have, not that we have to create something bad to get those lessons, because obviously we don't, but
sometimes it's more fun that way, I guess.
Are we having fun yet?
Are we having fun yet?
Yeah. Are we having fun yet? Have we reached the intensity yet? Is kind of the question, I guess.
Well, it feels like we could probably talk another hour about this sort of thing, and I think that this is also a really great place to end. And thank you, Dustin, for coming on.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
It's really cool. Really cool.
Thank you, Dustin. Great to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
I hope to have Dustin more involved in things what we're doing behind the scenes as time goes on, and share notes and all of this. It's kind of become like a brother pretty quickly over here. So
is that me? Am I screwing up there?
That's it. So thank you all for listening, and viewing, and if this has piqued your interest at all and you want to do a deeper dive, if you go to sacredcommerce.com, we have courses, we have videos there, we have the book, and I think Rowan's midway through an emotional alchemy 6-month training that will be accepting new students in the summer. Is that right? Yeah, and we also have
a 3-month training.
A 3-month training, and then we're also doing a tour to Egypt in the winter. And please check out
This year is sold out.
Oh, it's sold out already.
Sold
Okay.
out. I have two. I have a discounted room left actually.
Okay.
But basically it's sold out, and next year's dates are already in place. So
Great.
if you want to. If you know you want to come on that, then just put your name down early because it does tend to sell out pretty quick. It's a very real experience, actually. I mean, whoever comes, we end up as family. We travel as spiritual family.
Yeah.
And every single one has been a very deep, very bonding, very awakening. There's something about, I mean, those temples are built to raise consciousness, where they're built with that intention. So there is something to that level of intention being embodied in such a massive way, and then going there, holding that intention as yourself as well, and the meeting of those two, it's alchemical every time.
Yeah. Your journey to Egypt starts the minute you open up Sacred Commerce, and the trainings can help prepare you for that journey. So please join the community and contact Rowan. She's super accessible, and that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you, man.
Appreciate
really
it.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Love you, Rowan.
Thank you. Love you guys.